Oh, awesome. Of 2021. We're so excited to have you all here. If you wouldn't mind, I always love knowing who's in the audience. So maybe just get a chance and say hello really fast. Maybe share where you're currently located. I think that's one of the cool parts about doing this all virtual is that we are all over the world. Maybe if this is your first MLUX ever, I would love to hear about that. Welcome. We're so excited that you're here. And we'll get started in just a minute. Hello, Bob from the SF Bay Area. Bob is one of our amazing volunteers who also helps write up a bunch of our past talks. So thank you, Bob. You can check out his work on Medium. Bonjour, everyone. First time here from Baltimore. Amazing. You got me fooled. I thought that you were going to be from France or something, unless you are from France and you're just in Baltimore, but then amazing. Saleema from the Seattle area. Ooh, exciting news. We're going to be hearing more from Saleema in a minute. Oh, anthropologist UXR from Brazil. Oh, yeah, you joined last time. Welcome back. Heather from the Bay Area. Amazing. We have students from UC Berkeley, from Oakland, from Montreal. Hey, Arna, if you wouldn't mind turning off your camera too, just to spare everyone's bandwidth, so that way there's only 2 video streams. Fantastic Sid from North Carolina. Sam, a grad student at Berkeley. If anyone wants to share too, like kind of what they work in, do you work in the UX side? Do you work in the data science side? I'm super interested. Oh, Mina, a grad student at UW. Mina saw the HAX Toolkit and was all like, this is super cool, and potentially is going to write it up for a Medium blog. So thank you. Awesome. SoCal, regular Cal. It's a joke because that's what they call UC Berkeley is also Cal. So Australia, wow, what time is it in Australia? I'm so bad at the different time zones and everything too. I'll give folks another moment to join. Transitioning to a career in UX design, very interested in ML, amazing. Heather, we're so excited that you're here. Keep us posted on how you combine ML and UX. And also too, if anyone has, I know that we're not able to gather like we used to, where you can meet people and be like, I have a job posting or something. Now is your chance. If you are like, hey, I am hiring for a really cool UX designer focused on ML, or here's my LinkedIn and I want to talk to more people. Doesn't always work out the same as if it's in person because we're just in like the comment section of a Zoom call. But feel free to try and make those connections. Shamelessly self-promote if you're like, I'm super cool, connect with me on LinkedIn. Awesome. I have heard some success stories of our virtual talks where folks are able to follow up for coffee and everything too, or sweet. Thank you, Heather, for being the first one for sharing your LinkedIn. Awesome. Yeah, or if you saw someone else like, I don't know, another Australian is all like, cool, another Australian interested in ML and UX, totally use the Zoom chat function and follow up individually. I love it. Saleema mentioned that Saleema's our guest speaker, by the way. She runs the Microsoft Research HAX team, and they're hiring a summer 22 internship. So all y'all grad students at UC Berkeley, I'm sure a lot of you are from the iSchool. Check it out. Awesome. Okay, so we're probably going to get a couple more people, but for the interest of time, I'm going to get started. Seems like there are a lot of folks here, and thank you all so much for joining us, wherever you are in the world, whatever time it is. We really appreciate it, especially since this is our last one of 2021. So very quickly, today we are super excited to announce that we're going to have a case study by the Microsoft Research lead of the Human AI Experience, or HAX Toolkit, which, by the way, Saleema, I love that abbreviation. I just think that that's so awesome. Let me just breeze through some of you. This might be your first time here, so I'll just kind of set the stage about who we are and what we do, and then I'll hand it over to Saleema because that is really why we're all here. Woohoo! Okay. So, hi, we're MLUX. I may be up here speaking. My name is Michelle. I'm the organizer and founder, but there are a ton of people behind the scenes helping make this event possible. And so thank you so much to all the folks who have volunteered their time and energy over, especially this last year, as we pivoted to totally virtual events. A little bit about machine learning and UX too. We like to think about how do we make data-driven design decisions? So using data science, machine learning, AI, all those different techniques in order to inform and drive those design decisions, but also how do we design experiences, that are shaping the way these algorithms work, machine learning works, allowing users for control and feedback, and when those two come together. Oh, and I'm also just going to say too, I know that there's quite a few folks who are mentioning, oh, I'm entering into the UX career. UX is a lot more than just visual design. It is UX research, information architecture, copywriting. Is really about the entire experience of the product. And when I say data too, I'm sorry for all the ML folks out there, AI folks, I'm lumping it all together. But I think that's important because that's how our users perceive this technology is, it doesn't matter if it's artificial intelligence or just a logic of, did you attach the thing that you mean to attach? See attachment, like that could be a regex check and that still feels intelligent. And so that's an important thing to think about too. So we talk all about those types of best practices and case studies, and we make a collaborative environment between UX, data science, and everyone in between, focusing on these tech talks, these case studies, and all this stuff too. Don't worry if this is your first time and you're like, wow, this is cool, and I really want to learn more. We're like all over every social media. So definitely take a look. We post all of our past talks up on YouTube as well, so definitely check that out. And as you could tell when you registered, all of our events are free in order to allow everyone access. But we do ask for donations that go back to our larger nonprofit, Feminist AI. That being said, we cannot happen without you. So we are able to host all these events because you all in the community come forward and you're like, hey, I have a really cool thing that I want to share. And that's amazing. So whether you are at a small startup or you're a PhD student and you're working on something cool, like we want to hear from you. And especially in 2022, we would love to feature some of y'all for future talks. We just had a really great talk last month, which was more of a demo. Someone came forward and they're like, hey, I'm super interested in teaching UX researchers how to use unsupervised learning on survey data to create clusters. Oh my gosh, what amazing. So how to use machine learning data science techniques for UX research. So cool. The other thing that I wanted to mention too is that we have a survey that is out right now that is helping us decide on the future of 2022. And so if you haven't taken that, please do take a moment to fill that out and just help us understand what you all are interested in for the survey. Oh, I don't know why it copied slide 12 and everything too. Okay. Oh, I copied all that. Great. So intelligent. Okay. Whatever, it doesn't matter because the point is take a moment, fill out that survey. We would love to hear from you as we're planning, or feel free to reach out. humans@mluxsf.com is the best way to reach us if you have a cool talk. On the last but two, you may have noticed a donation option for your tickets today. All of that goes back to Feminist AI. Right now, they're doing a, I guess the slide is a little bit outdated, sorry about that, a Reimagine AI for Everybody, as well as a installation in their LA-based studio on with Gababaya. So definitely check that out if that is of interest. If there's some people y'all are in SoCal, so go over and check them out. They're just very cool. Anyways, okay. Without further ado, I am super excited to introduce Saleema. Saleema, I have been a longtime fan. I think when I was in grad school, I reached out to you and I was very shy. I was all like, I think you're very cool. You're doing really cool things over at Microsoft. And it's been really nice to kind of see how you have released all these amazing tools out into the world, one of which I'm really excited to talk about, which is the HAX Toolkit, which we are going to blah, hear all about today. But the other one is a longtime fan of the Guidelines for Human AI Interaction cards that came out in Kai 2019. So if you haven't checked those out, those are on the MLUX resources list. It's definitely one of my favorites. They're up towards the top because I think everyone should hang out and play with them. Anyways, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you to present, and I'll let you introduce yourself to everyone and share with us what you have going on over at Microsoft Research.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you, wait, no, there we go. There, yeah?
Yes, we can see it. Thank you.
And then let me present. Okay.
Wait,
there we go. Yeah?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. So I'm not sure if I can see chat while I'm talking, but Michelle, maybe like feel free to stop me if there are important questions people have. Otherwise, you'll take questions at the end. But I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me, Michelle. I really love this community that you've built up. And I'm just super excited to share some of what we've been doing at Microsoft at this intersection of machine learning and user experiences. So as Michelle said, I'm here today to talk about the HAX Toolkit. I'm Saleema Amershi. I'm a Senior Principal of Research Manager of the HAX team. So HAX stands for Human AI Experiences. And we recently released this toolkit for creating fluid and responsible human AI experiences. So before I dive in, I wanted to just acknowledge that this is really the work of a lot of people across the company over several years, including researchers, practitioners, interns who span many disciplines, including AI, machine learning, HCI, user experience design, all of that. And so the HAX Toolkit is part of Microsoft's Responsible AI initiative. So I'm sure many of you have heard of the term responsible AI. The way I see it is sort of like responsible AI is this movement that's really driving change and accountability across the industry. And that's because society is really starting to demand and should be demanding that the AI-based systems that we deploy into the world and that affect our everyday lives are safe and fair, reliable, trustworthy, all of that. Of course, change is hard, as always. In this case, creating responsible AI solutions requires a lot of things to happen. It requires cultural shifts, so shifting our mindsets and embracing diversity throughout the development process. It requires organizational changes to help us align our business metrics with our responsible AI objectives. And it requires technical and socio-technical advances to help people like our developers and the tech industry build AI technologies with people in mind from the beginning. So for its part, Microsoft has really been pushing in the space for several years. We've built up a really large ecosystem now that involves people from across the company to help drive some of these changes that are needed to shift the conversation around AI from being tech-centered to being more human-centered. One thing that I'm really proud of at Microsoft is the sort of holistic approach that we've been taking throughout the process. And we can see this in the sort of tools and best practices that we've been creating. So we've been looking at creating tools both for building AI models more responsibly, like you see here on the left, which is our Responsible AI Toolbox, which was actually just announced yesterday at the Microsoft Research Summit, which is ongoing, by the way. I think tomorrow is the last day, and it's free and open to everybody, so you can drop in. I encourage you to do that to learn more about the toolbox. We also talked about the HAX Toolkit there, and so the HAX Toolkit is tools for building AI experiences more responsibly. And so really both of these are needed to ensure that our AI systems are safe, fair, and responsible. And so today I'm going to talk about the HAX Toolkit in particular. So the HAX Toolkit is a set of tools that you can start using today to create more responsible AI experiences. And it's intended to support the everyday work of interdisciplinary teams with really an emphasis on the PM, design, and user research disciplines. And each of the tools in the toolkit is grounded in the stated needs of teams that we've been working with across the company. And so this quote here really sums up sort of what we were hearing when we started work in this space. So this is a quote from a design manager, a longtime design manager saying, you know, AI is one of the most ambiguous spaces I've ever worked in all my years of working in design. There aren't really any rules and we don't have a lot of the tools. Okay, so we built some tools. So the first tool we created, Michelle mentioned, was the Guidelines for Human AI Interaction. So this is part of the toolkit. Some of you may be familiar with these because they were released a couple of years ago. They're shown here on screen, and they're a set of 18 generally applicable best practices describing how an AI system should behave as a user interacts with them. Okay, so this includes initially, during regular interaction with the user, when the AI is inevitably wrong, and how the AI should evolve with feedback from the user over time. So I'm going to describe some of these later in the talk, but for now, all you need to know is that the guidelines really synthesizes over 20 years of research and thinking in this space. We tested them with design practitioners and researchers across the company against dozens of popular AI products from Microsoft, but also from other companies. And they're currently widely used across Microsoft. And so we created the guidelines with the goal of helping teams create better AI experiences faster. And so one of the designers we worked with summed it up well, saying, you know, it took us 4 years to come up with 80% of the guidelines. That's the point of this, right? If you can institutionalize this in the design parts of products, you give people an opportunity to build a much better product in Gen 1. Okay, so that is the point. Now, while the guidelines are widely used across the company, we've done many workshops, engagements with teams, and we do this all the time to continue to learn about challenges that people are facing on the ground. And one person said, you know, these guidelines are great, but how can you make this as part of people's, you know, work? And that's fair, right? Like, it's one thing to say how an AI system should behave. It's another to try to help teams like operationalize these best practices in their day-to-day jobs. Okay, so this and the specific challenges that we were hearing from teams and from people inspired the other tools in the toolkit, including, which I'll go over later today, the HAX Workbook, which is a discussion guide to help you plan for implementing best practices for human AI interaction as described by the guidelines. The HAX Design Patterns and Library, which includes established design patterns and examples that illustrate the best practices in everyday AI products and features. And the HAX Playbook, which is for identifying and mitigating common human AI interaction failures before deployment. So these are the tools you can start using today, and more are coming down the pipelines, and we'll continue to release tools as we build them in the HAX Toolkit. So I'm going to explain how you can use each of these tools with a real example. Okay, so I'm going to share an example from a team at Microsoft, the Family Safety App team, that used the toolkit to proactively identify and mitigate potential risks of a new AI-based feature that they wanted to introduce. So the Family Safety App is an app that can be shared across family members to promote digital safety and well-being. So it does things like allows family members to share their location and web usage histories. It allows parents and guardians to do things like set screen limits or app limits, or require approval before someone makes purchases online, etc. So the Family App team had this idea for a new AI-based feature that they wanted to include in the app. Okay, so that means they were really in the sort of earliest phase of a typical development process where they were just like brainstorming and ideating about a new feature. Now, the HAX Toolkit doesn't actually have a tool to support this phase yet. You know, we may in the future. It's something we think about, and a lot of people across the community are thinking deeply about this. This is, you know, arguably one of the most critical decisions you'll make. right? About whether or not it's appropriate or necessary to introduce an AI feature. And, for this, at this point, we just recommend, you do your user research, talk to your direct and indirect stakeholders, think about the downstream risks and all of that. But now once you've decided to go forward with a feature, then that's when you can start using the toolkit. Okay, so the idea that this team had for a feature was a feature that could automatically flag or highlight potentially concerning searches so that family members could stay aware and discuss if needed. Okay, so they call this the flag search feature. And the idea behind this was that the app was already allowing people to share their activities and app usage and search histories. But given that, people and kids are on their phones all the time these days, it can really be a lot of information to process. And so they thought it might help to automatically highlight searches that may be potentially concerning so people could talk about it. So this is some of the early mock-ups that they had when they were just brainstorming about this feature. And then once they decided to go forward with it, this is when they came to us for help. Okay, so they were just starting to plan for the feature. And this is great because this is when we encourage teams to start using the toolkit. And so what we did was we pointed them to a tool that we're just starting to develop actually at the time called the HAX Workbook. So the HAX Workbook is really a simple, flexible Excel worksheet that teams can use to help guide those early planning conversations that are needed to implement human AI interaction best practices. And we created this because time and again, we heard that from people that we were working with that, a lot of the guidelines are based upon engineering more than design. Some would require a full-scale overhaul of the back end. And if the spec doesn't have that built into it, it's going to be too rigid to respond. Okay, so what that means is that if you really want to implement best practices for human AI interaction in an AI feature, you really have to plan for it up front or it's not going to happen. So we created the HAX Workbook to help with this. This is actually what the workbook looks like. Again, it's an Excel worksheet, and it's broken down into 5 steps that are listed along the columns here. And then on the rows, you have the 18 guidelines along with examples and prompts that you can use to help you fill in the worksheet with your team. So what happens is, when you have an idea for a new feature and you're starting to plan, the first thing you would do is go through step 1, where you would go down the column, looking at each guideline and deciding whether it's relevant for your feature or not. Okay, as I said, there are 18 guidelines. Not all of them are going to be relevant for every feature. Okay, so this is meant to be a relatively quick step. Then once you figure out which ones are relevant, you filter for and focus only on those that are relevant, and you go to step 2. Step 2 is where you discuss with your team the impact of implementing that guideline or not. And by impact, we're talking about the user impact, okay? So you would brainstorm with your team to discuss this and estimate the user impact from high, medium, or low. Then before going to step 3, you'd filter and only focus on the highly impactful guidelines. And then in step 3, this is where you would think about how to actually implement that guideline. So there are many ways to implement any of the guidelines. Some are more costly than others. And so this is where, again, it's important to brainstorm across your team to figure out what makes the most sense for your product or feature. You also estimate resources in this step. And then finally, in step 4 is where you would prioritize which of the guidelines you want to implement. And we recommend thinking about both the impact to the user as well as the resource costs required and when you're doing this prioritization step. Then finally, in step 5 is where you can track the work. So you can either use the workbook to track the work directly here, or you can export these as work items that you can track in your own project management tools. So the Family App team went through this process, which took them about 3 to 4 hours, spread out over a few sessions, and involved different members of their team. And this was actually led by the data science PM on the team, and they brought in their designers and data scientists as needed for conversations. So I'm going to walk you through what they came up with and how this process impacted the design and development of that feature that they were thinking about. So their first step was to figure out which of the guidelines were going to be relevant for this flag search feature. So they went through this process and they determined that the guidelines you see highlighted here were relevant. So I'm not going to go over all of these, but I'm going to give you a few examples. So for one, the team found that guidelines G1 and G2, so the blue guidelines here, were relevant. These guidelines are really about setting the right expectations initially about what the AI can do and how well it can do what it can do. And the reason they found that this was relevant was that, you know, the concept of concerning is just inherently ambiguous. And even in unambiguous cases, the system is going to get it wrong sometimes. So the team felt that it was important for people using this, especially parents or guardians, to have the right expectations about this thing so that they wouldn't, you know, over rely on it for important discussions. The team also found that G6 here, which is mitigating social biases, so it's part of the red category. So the red category is really all about matching the user's context during interaction. So that includes their surrounding context, their environmental context, as well as their social context. Now, of course, context is important for all applications, but in AI, a lot of AI-based features will make inferences based on your surrounding context or your social context. And those inferences, you know, depend on who the user is and where they are and what they're doing. So the team found that G6 in particular, which is about mitigating social biases, was really relevant for this feature because this concept of concerning may mean different things for different groups of people. And the team was being really proactive here, right? They really wanted to ensure that the feature wasn't going to reinforce unfair or undesirable stereotypes or biases about what this term could mean. Similarly, they thought that these two guidelines around planning for when the AI is wrong. So this yellow category is planning for when the AI is wrong. And AI is always going to go wrong in some way. And so it's important to give users the tools and resources to intervene or override when that happens. So the particular guidelines that the team thought were relevant here were scope services when in doubt. So this is G10. And this is really about less being more when the system is uncertain. And in this case, because of the sensitive nature of this topic of concerning, they thought it was important not to be overly confident in what they're flagging as concerning. They also thought G11 was important, which is about making clear why the system did what it did. And they wanted to be able to provide people who are using this, like parents, an explanation, especially when the feature was wrong. So people could understand like how it was even determining what was concerning or not. Finally, the team felt that several of the guidelines in this over time category, the green category here, were important. Again, related to this idea that concerning could mean different things for different people. So G13 and G15 are about learning from user feedback and in particular giving people the ability to explicitly steer and personalize what the system might consider as concerning. So they thought that was particularly relevant. And then finally, G16 is conveying the consequences of your actions. And the team really wanted people to feel heard when they were steering the system. Okay, so these are the guidelines that the team found were relevant. So the next step then what they would do is talk about which ones would have the most impact if they were to implement it or not. Okay, so again, they came together as a team to discuss some of these, and some of what they said were, you know, not setting the right expectations. So remember, these are G1 and G2. Not doing this could result in people over relying on this feature, and they could miss some unflagged searches. Similarly, scoping services when in doubt, right? Like not being overly confident or doing less when you're uncertain, allows the user to make their own decisions about whether something is concerning or not, right? And finally, you know, learning from user feedback, the green category, G13 and G15, helps to create trust with the user and shows that we're willing to learn and that we accept that the AI system is not going to be perfect. All right, so this is all about impact, this second step here. So then before going to step 3, the team, filtered on what they thought were the most impactful guidelines to implement. And then this is where they brainstormed how to actually build these guidelines, the relevant and highly impactful guidelines, into their feature. Okay, so like I said earlier, there are many ways to implement any of the guidelines. And so this is really part of the sort of design step in a typical AI development process. And so whether or not you're using the workbook, we actually have a tool that you can use. It's probably one of my favorite in the toolkit. I see Michelle like excited. I mean, we were very excited about this too, because one of the things people asked for most as we were working in this space is examples. They just want to like see like how are people doing this. And in our process of creating the guidelines, we collected like hundreds of examples of these guidelines being applied or not. And so finally we like built this into a library that people can look through, and I'll show you in just a second, but it's also extensible, and you can submit patterns, you can submit examples. So it's really exciting. The Family App team didn't actually have this at the time, but I'm going to show you how you could use it for their scenario. Okay, so let me pop out for a second. Okay, so this is the HAX Toolkit website. You can still see my screen, yes? Thumbs up, Michelle? Yeah, okay. So the design library looks like this, okay? So over on the left, you can filter. I want to clear the filters. You can filter by guideline. You can look at different product categories, different application types. And over on the right, you have 3 different types of content. The guidelines themselves, patterns. These are abstract, flexible patterns that can be reused across different applications, and examples of those patterns. So if you recall, the team found that it was really important to set the right expectations. So this is, making clear what the system can do and how well it can do it. So if, you're in a team and you decide this is an important guideline to implement, you could go through the library and look at different ways of implementing it. So, of course, like an obvious way to do this is just like, write an explanation, an introductory blurb. But there's actually like a lot of different other ways you can do this too, right? You can, for example, expose system controls. So I'm going to actually look at this. So this is a pattern. Every pattern sort of has the same format of problem, solution, points about like when you can use it, how you actually implement it, common pitfalls to avoid, etc. Okay, so this is really about giving people an idea of what a system can do through making controls over that feature visible. So an example of this is, so in Big Maps does this by showing, so this is showing different controls here, showing that the system can actually provide directions for driving as well as walking and taking public transport. Right, so it doesn't always have to be a textual explanation. Similarly, like the team found that learning from user behaviors and providing granular feedback, that's about like giving people control to steer the system. Those were relevant and important for their context. So you can use the library and filter for those types of examples and patterns. And again, look at different ways that people have done this. And these examples span products like across the industry. So for example, for encouraging granular feedback, you can give people controls. You can explicitly request feedback. So these are basically push or pull models. There are really a lot of different ways to do any of these. And so you can use this library as a resource to help you brainstorm how you want to implement any of the guidelines for your particular application. There's also a way you can submit patterns and examples to us, and we can share. And we really hope this will be like a resource and a growing thing for the community to learn from each other.
Can I just jump in for a second
Yes,
about like
please.
how huge I think this is? Like, I am just so grateful that you and your team have one, aggregated a bunch of examples from across the industry, but then two, kind of open sourced it and allowed anyone to submit their own. Like, that is so cool. And I know I mean, there were a lot of people who were introducing themselves in the chat too, who might be from smaller startups. Like, don't think that all those big companies have all the answers. Like, we are so interested in how you approach these problems and submit these guidelines, and change the way how we design for AI.
Definitely. And we feel the same. And thank you so much for saying that. Like we were trying to build this for a really long time. We really thought it would help teams, and we just want to be able to sort of have people share their knowledge. Like this space is new for everyone, and there's a lot we can learn from sharing the ways we implement things, and even the guidelines themselves. Like we're talking about, what is a V2 of this? Like what have we learned in the last couple of years? This whole field is growing, and so we're very much open to changing things, adding things. Just reach out to us if you have ideas and examples to share. Okay, so that was using the library to sort of help you in this design phase. This is step 3, again, going back to the workbook. This is where you would brainstorm what you might want to do. And I already said that, like the team, was interested in or thought that G1 and G2 were relevant. So they decided in their case that they would implement this by showing a message that the system's not going to be right all the time. To mitigate biases, they decided the way to do this was to test, amongst other things, test with different social groups. And learning from user feedback, they wanted a way to, give people an ability to provide feedback, but they also, talked about how they would actually incorporate that feedback into the model, right? Not like if you want a system to learn and personalize over time, there has to be a way for the model to retrain either in batch or online, and that requires work. And again, this is why you really have to think about this way early on, because if you've chosen a model or built your system to not be able to do this, it's going to be very costly to change later on. Okay, so after step 3, then they went through this, prioritization phase, and then decided what to actually implement, and then they attracted in their work processes. So I'm actually going to show you the designs that resulted from this, right? So setting expectations. So here you see that the designs that they mocked up to explain not only what the system was doing, like what search terms are flagged, how you can look these up, but there's also, information of saying that, sometimes we're not going to get it right. And I think this is really important because there's a tendency to want to, to explain or, highlight these systems as magic, but, that has some consequences. And in some cases, you really want to make sure people understand that these things will make mistakes. So these are the screens they mocked up for that. In terms of mitigating social biases, they worked to augment their data set actually to reduce biases. They tested it with different social groups. For scoping services, so this is again less being more when in doubt. So they added certainty thresholds, so only flag things when they were very certain. They added screens to give people information about why any given term was flagged as concerning. And then here for learning over time, they provided ways for people to give feedback that would be incorporated into the model. So you could say, see that, tell us if this term shouldn't be flagged. And then they gave a response, right? Like, thanks for letting us know, and we're going to use this information. Then you'd be surprised at how many, systems that like take feedback from users don't give a sense of what is going to happen. And that can really discourage people from giving feedback and improving the model, which is what you want. Okay, so now that the team had like designed their mocks and like gone through this process, figured out how they wanted this thing to behave, this is when you would like start to build your sort of low fidelity prototypes. And this is when this prototyping phase is where you can also start to get early feedback about how people are going to be using this thing. And so we actually have a tool in the toolkit to help with this called the HAX Playbook. And it's to help you think through common human AI interaction failure scenarios. And so this is what the playbook looks like on the right. And, again, we created this because what we heard when we were working with teams is that anticipating AI experiences failures was hard. Because AI systems are probabilistic, they change over time, it's difficult to know what type of errors it's going to make at any given moment. And so often we heard that teams were, when they're prototyping and designing, they're focusing more on the sort of hero scenarios, saying things like, it's just so hard to know until the bad things happen, right? Until you deploy. And of course, that's not when you want to discover things that are happening or not working. And so we created this tool to help teams work through different types of failures and plan for them. So let me show you that. It's also in the toolkit. So this is the HAX Playbook. You can, this is just information about it. You can launch the HAX Playbook. It's really a simple interactive tool where on the left is where you answer questions about the feature you're trying to build. And on the right is going to come up with scenarios that you can design for and test or get user feedback on. So for this flag search feature, it's a classification feature, right? It's classifying text as, concerning or not. It's text-based. It's going to have a clear way of knowing. I'm flying by this, but basically you would go through this process, and as you're answering these questions, you'll notice that the test cases on the right are updating. And so again, this is intended to be used early on when you might be trying to decide, like, how you want to have this thing operate. And as you make changes to your answers, the system will update. So binary classification, right? We're looking at concerning or not. And so once you've gone through this process, you can work through and read through the information on the right to think about the errors that you might want to prepare, or, design for. So, I'm going to just jump to the bottom here. Like, there's this concerning, we already talked about, is this ambiguous concept. And so we give some guidance on how you might simulate that. Similarly, this is binary classification. So false positives and false negatives are going to happen, right? So this is really to remind teams about these common types of errors that might happen, so that you can, create mockups for that and get feedback and make sure there's mitigations that are built in for people to recover when those things happen. And so we say, you can simulate this by assigning a negative label to data point. There's just more information about how you might actually test this. This also supports mostly the scenarios that we support in this tool are natural language scenarios. So you'll see a lot of natural language scenarios here. So if you're working on a natural language type of feature, you can use this tool to try to look at or plan for different human AI interaction failures. You can also export, once you've gone through this process and figured out which of the scenarios are likely to occur in your product, you can export this, as CSVs, or import it into your project management tools, again, to help you track. Okay, quickly go back to my slides. Then this keeps happening. Okay, so the prototyping phase, you can use the HAX Playbook to plan for these different types of failures. And then as you go along, you would build out your system more and more. And then the sort of testing phase is where you would, pretty much have a fully functional system. This is an open space. Like a lot of these problems, there's so much to do in this space. We're working on stuff to sort of help teams test with humans in the loop. A lot of times with our AI features, we do a lot of offline testing, but how a system behaves offline is often very different than how it will behave when a user's interacting. So stay tuned. Check the website for tools, and we'll announce when we release something in this space. And similarly, when after you deploy, design doesn't stop then, right? You want to be monitoring user feedback, just establishing user feedback channels, being ready to roll back and update if necessary. Those are all things that we recommend. With that, we don't currently have tools in the toolkit for, but hopefully someday we will. So that's sort of a summary of like what tools are currently in the toolkit. And I hope that gave you a sense of like how you can use it to go sort of from an idea for an AI feature to, you know, prototyping and deploying something that implements these sort of best practices that we know of. Like I said before, we're learning all the time. We would love to hear feedback there. If, you know, if you're interested in getting involved, you know, contact us. You can use this toolkit right now. You can add examples and patterns. You know, there are many ways. Also, as I said at the very beginning, we're hiring for summer interns. So reach out if you're interested in anything in the space. And so with that, you know, I can answer questions.
Woo! Oh my gosh, so awesome. I know all of us are on mute with our video off and everything too, but this was truly fantastic. And thank you so much again for not only showing us this amazing resource, but showing us an example on how we can use the resource on our day-to-day jobs. And I don't know if you can see in the chat, people are clapping and everything too. And I just put the contact information down there.
Yeah.
I think with all the claps, I may have lost some of the questions. So if you wouldn't mind resubmitting your question again in the chat. And I actually have a couple of questions for you, Saleema, before we get started and people resubmit their chat. I would love to hear, oh yes, here is Saleema's Twitter, by the way. I would love to hear, like, this is an amazing resource and such a cool toolkit. You've given us one example of how a team uses it. Could you give us some background about, like, what does that look like on a day-to-day? Who is the HAX Toolkit team? Is it just designers? Is it AI researchers? Like, who's behind it?
Okay, this is a great example or great question because so the HAX team is brand new. It's at MSR. So I lead the HAX team now at MSR. It's a mix of AI, HCI, and software engineering researchers. And it's really an outgrowth of the Ether working group on human AI interaction and collaboration, which is, so I think I showed earlier in the deck that we have this really comprehensive ecosystem around responsible AI at Microsoft made up of people across the company, but also there's this sort of three main pillars. Ether, which I'm part of, started by Eric Horvitz, is there to advise and advance the state of the art in responsible AI. We also have the Office of Responsible AI that creates our policies and standards, and then RAISE, which is our third pillar, which is intended to help teams across the company implement best practices. And so Ether started a few years ago, and we were working on, so like I said, I led there's made up of several working groups, roughly tied to our responsible AI principles of fairness, inclusivity, you know, safety, reliability, et cetera. And so the guidelines came out of Ether a few years ago, and that's because it's a cross-company V team, and we were hearing from design folks that like they were very much struggling with how to design for AI, because AI is a lot of what we know about interacting with computing systems, you know, break down when it comes to AIs because they will fail, they're probabilistic, they're, you know, they operate under uncertainty and all of that. And then, you know, over the years, we continued to work with teams across the company, and that's how we built up these other tools in the HAX Toolkit. So the HAX Toolkit is really from the Ether working group, of which I lead, but I also have people now with me at MSR who were not part of the working group initially, but really like the HAX team now at MSR is to scale up the work in this space, because a lot of what we were doing with the HAX Toolkit was a lot of volunteer work, you know, people who are just really passionate about the space across the company. And you know, we realized that like there's so much more to be done in this space that we really need like people to be working on this full time. And so that's how the HAX team at MSR started.
Awesome.
That was a long-winded thing, but
thank you. Well, and also too, it's really nice to know that it's like an interdisciplinary team, that there was a lot of interest, and also to hear that there's support across the company. Like you mentioned that quote in the beginning of like, cool, this is amazing, but like, how do we use it? I think that's a lot of what we feel. I know a lot of folks can really resonate with that. Okay, thank you to everyone for resending your questions. We have some coming in. I am really interested in this most recent one. Any guidelines or resources for addressing AI literacy for non-ML AI users like subject experts or citizen data scientists? Yeah, I think that one is super interesting because just because you can design something doesn't mean that you might be literate in how the AI works. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, this is something that we heard also when we were talking to people on the ground, that they felt like it was hard, and it's still hard to work across these disciplinary boundaries. And this is why I really love this community, Michelle, that you've created, because it brings these communities together, and they speak different languages, and they're trained in different things, and so that was a challenge that we heard over and over. And so, in fact, the tools itself, like the workbook and the playbook, are meant to be used across disciplines, like with several members of your team. So in that sense, they can act like a boundary object. But I think this is like just an ongoing issue. And I think there's AI literacy for HCI and design and user research, but I think there's also design literacy that AI and machine learning folks need to learn about too. And that is something I actually feel pretty optimistic about these days, because I've been working in the machine learning space for over almost 20 years now, and it's it's been hard, to explain the need for, HCI and user research. And I feel like this responsible AI movement is really like, forcing people to listen and think about other ways of building technology. So I think there's an opportunity for AI machine learning folks to gain some design literacy as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So on a much more like practical on the ground level, you shared a ton of tools, like, oh my gosh, so cool, amazing. And you showed us like how one team kind of used the suite of tools to improve their product. Would you recommend that we leverage the toolkit at what level? Sorry, I'm also reading this out loud. I'm still never good at this. Is it intended to be applied per feature, workflow? Is it meant to be applied at the product or platform level? Can you share a little bit more about how we can apply it?
Yeah. It's the feature level is really what it's intended for. And that's because, when you get to the product level, there are so many different features that can work together in driving an AI. So that is like, it is somewhat of a struggle, right? Because like, to do this process for every single feature might be a lot. So I don't have a great answer. It works best with the feature level. The platform level is also a whole nother beast, right? Because if you're building platforms that are intended to support a variety of different types of scenarios, then it gets really even more hard to anticipate what users will need. So again, many open problems in this space, and that's why we need this community to, help solve these problems.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And apologies, Arna, I definitely opened up your link and it went right over our slideshow presentation. Oops. Thank you too for also sharing that context around it too, of like why it's created. Another question that we have is like, how do UX researchers pivot to working on HCI or AI domains? Do you think the future of UX research or HCI research is going to require more coding or ML ops to implement some of these guideline features? How do you think the future of design for AI is going to look?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unrealistic and unreasonable to like require or need like, design and use research to also, get like a degree in machine learning and AI, right? And similarly for AI folks to get a degree in these HCI and, UX concepts. So, I really hope that there's, for one, like more work on boundary objects. I think there's a lot more that can be done to sort of facilitate communication and collaboration across these different disciplines. But I'm hoping that like as these teams come to, or these disciplines come together, that part of what seems like scary now, or people don't understand now that they might learn over time. So I don't think it's reasonable that you would need to like learn everything. I think it's good to know some of these concepts, like basic concepts of AI, but like I don't think you need to know like how to create a new AI algorithm. You
Yeah.
know, I think learning the basics of like these things, like look for patterns, and then they learn from data. And there's a few types of errors that they can commonly make. And so I think really for the responsible AI space, the tech industry needs the skills of user researchers, right? They need people who can understand and empathize with users, right? They need people who can go talk to those folks and understand how different AI failures might impact them, or the downstream effects of these systems. And like I think there's a huge need for UX and HCI in this space. So I really do hope folks in this audience, pursue this topic.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And also for all the ML and data scientist folks, go find a UX friend.
Mm-hmm.
We're not scary. I used to be one of those people. Okay, so another thing that has been really interesting is the fact that you have like pseudo open sourced it. So I'm going to try to combine a couple questions here. Are there any chances of like ongoing collaborations, like especially with other groups that are maybe making their own, like the pair guidebook kind of thing and everything too? I don't know if you know anything about the future of this, or if it's possible to truly open source this and not host it by the curators being at Microsoft, like who gets to curate it? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so like for like the guidelines, and the library is like you can submit things to it. The playbook is like fully open source. You can extend it to different scenarios.
Awesome.
I mean, I definitely like so Microsoft is involved in things like the partnership in AI, which is across company, across industry organization. And so we work with folks in other companies that way. I definitely see like synergies and with other groups, like, the pair group, I know folks there well, and I think there's a lot of work to be done in this space. So, I mean, we're definitely open to people working with us, collaborating with us, and we pay attention to what's going on in the industry, and I think the industry just needs more people looking at this all together. So great.
Awesome. I love it. And I even so, I'm so excited that you have taken the first steps on, modeling that it doesn't need to be all examples from one company. It can be examples that feature really great things from other places. And truly, anyone who is listening who is at a startup and doing something cool and innovative, and you're like, man, I don't see any big company doing it, like totally share, totally submit it. I'm super interested in those patterns that are going to rise. Okay, I have one final question for you. Oh, sorry. Did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, like, so the library is based on the guidelines right now, and the guidelines were very much about sort of like, these are the basics, right? And they're not going to all apply to every scenario. And I do think that you're going to need additional guidelines for different scenarios. When you get to like, ambient, intelligent environments, or, more collaborative environments where like there's really more of a partnership going on with an AI system. Like, I think there's more to be learned there. And, we always like hoped that this would be like just the starting point, and that people could build off that. And we're a bunch of researchers. We like to learn, and like, we're totally open to learning and changing when we discover things are not working, or that there are better ways to do things, So please like reach out if you have comments and feedback.
I mean, they even provide their email. So I think it was HAX Toolkit at Microsoft.com or something. Like,
yes, if you go to the website, you can find it.
Yeah, I definitely am going to. Well, I guess I have your direct email because we coordinated this, but if I have thoughts, I will let you know. Or tweet at them. That's another great thing. Okay.
Yeah.
So my last question for you is, we are right on the hour, but you have a group of people who are passionate about the future of AI, UX, being a PM for AI, MLOps. What would be one piece of advice or guidance you want us all to take back to our teams tomorrow morning?
Yeah, I think I would say that, there's a lot of tension, I guess, in the sort of responsible and ethical AI space right now, and
Mhm.
rightly so. And I think you need that sort of tension to affect change. But I also want to remind people that I think I'm the most optimistic about the tech industry becoming more sort of human centered than I've ever been. And, again, I've been working in this space for many years, and it's something about this movement, the responsible AI movement, and that people are really recognizing the need to do things differently. And, I do feel that people are listening and the industry is listening. I mean, we don't always get it right, but machine learning folks who, are open to talking to across disciplinary boundaries, and that's, to me, really exciting. So I do hope that people see this as a challenge, but also an opportunity to change how the industry works.
Awesome. Thank you, Saleema. That's
No
fantastic.
problem.
That makes me feel optimistic.
Good.
On that note, too, I just want to quickly wrap up. I want to say thank you so much to Feminist AI for hosting us. They are the larger nonprofit. So when you give ticket donations, it goes back to Feminist AI programming, which allows folks from underrepresented groups who've not had access to AI, community-based programming, primarily based out of LA, but also online. Check them out. The other thing, oh my gosh, have you guys heard that we have a survey? It's going on like right now. You could fill it out and let us know the future of what you want for MLUX in 2022. We're listening because we're currently in planning there. But with all that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Saleema. Thank you to everyone. Please tell everyone at the HAX Toolkit that we really appreciate all of their hard work and putting this together. Thank you to all of you for tuning in. Thank you to Clara for hosting us. But we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you all. It would just be me and Saleema chit-chatting. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight.
Thank you
Awesome.
so much.
Thanks, y'all. I hope you can see, Saleema, that everyone's saying thank you in
Yeah,
the chat and
appreciate.
everything too. Awesome. Thank you. Truly, as you are basking in everyone being appreciative of this hard work, I know it's kind of a little bit one-sided of us just kind of speaking at you all, but I truly hope that you know that we are so excited. Personally, when I saw the design library in particular, I think I literally had a jaw drop moment. I was like, this exists now. I am so excited about this. And so I think Mina, one of the folks who was on the line, she is a PhD student at UW. She wanted to write up kind of like, hey, how do you apply this for MLUXers? And she's been to a couple events too. But
Awesome.
I don't know, Mina, if you're still on, but anyways. Okay. Yeah, the webinar or this recording will be up on our YouTube, bit.ly/MLUX YouTube. And on that note, I think that, oh, there's Mina. Hey, Mina, do you want to say hi?
Hello, hi. Thank you so much for this great talk, Saleema. I can't wait to write up about it.
No problem. And yeah, I went to UW, so reach out to me if you want to chat.
Mina, are you at UW or did I just make that up?
No, yeah, so I'm at UW, but I'm from the Human-Centered Design and Engineering Department, and I guess, Saleema, you were at CSE. Cool.
Yeah.
Small world, Mina, so no pressure, but whenever you get the Medium article,
Yes,
hey,
definitely.
thank you for taking the initiative to write it up too. I really appreciate that. And if any of you are interested in volunteering, we always need volunteers like that. Okay, so we're 4 minutes over time. I'm going to let you all go on to your wonderful evenings, but just thank you so much again, everyone.
Okay. Thanks. Have a good night, everyone.